All right. Welcome to another episode of Lens. Our guests today are brothers Wang and An, who both founded Creative Session, a design blog dedicated to ideas between the both of them. Wang and Ang have been very
Call him Ang. That's why he doesn't respond to you in text, you dick.
Wang and An have been very supportive of our initiatives and the things that we have done here at Advanced Design. They were our keynote speaker at our second Square One in Chicago, and so now we're bringing them back to help us with this initiative with Lens, and they have been, kind of advisors, off-record advisors of some sorts. But thank you, both of you, for being here, and I'm gonna give the floor over to both of you now.
Sick. Thank you guys. Hello everyone. If we didn't get to meet some of you guys because you're joining in later or whatnot, good to see you. Thank you for staying up late, some of you, to join our chat. I'm gonna share my screen real quick. Feel free to screen capture any of this because I know Hector's already recording this. Luckily, we're not showing anything secretive. You want to start? Just a little outline for what we want to talk about today. We want to talk a little bit about ourselves because I think all designers are sort of vain in that way. Just kidding. Actually, it lets us talk to you, give you a little bit of context of what we do. Therefore, it helps us validate sort of the topic we're going to go through today. Go a little bit on our background as Creative Session, and then where we're at now is Playground, and then sort of the lessons, right, of what Playground has taught us through design, and then at the end we'll do like a Q&A session. Hector said we could run it for 3 hours, so I hope you guys are ready. I like to start a lot of our projects with this quote. I think we need to constantly be reminded that sort of the best designs dissolve from our behaviors, and sometimes, especially at Playground, and we'll get into that as we go, is there's a lot of people who have really deep technical experience in their fields and their disciplines, and sometimes they geek out too much about sort of the science behind it, and therefore you forget about the human behaviors and the behaviors that we actually want to capture to design something like awesome. But essentially today, it's not the same as 4 or 5 years ago, but we feel as if we're jack of all trade, and I think it's okay in today's day and age to be able to comprehend all sort of the whole scope of design, not just being sort of a master at industrial design, but it's good to sort of have an oversight of everything under the umbrella of design. So that's kind of where we play, and here are some examples to kind of have you guys understand where we've been in the space. We've gone from what I started at Amazon, which is in-house, big corporation. On was at Astro. We both were at Astro interning. And then I left and went to Amazon after college. This was in like 2008. So feels about this time, right? Like it was like the recession, we graduated in the worst economy ever. It was really hard to find a job. And it kind of reminded us of this time now where like we're sort of sheltered in place. A lot of people are like downsizing. There's a lot of salary cuts. So it's depressing in a way, but I think there's still a lot of room for design, and there's sort of space for design to grow and evolve. So I think overall we're pretty optimistic because we've made it this far. We've kind of seen that. Some of the companies that we've worked with in the past are here. Today, we don't work on too much consumer electronics or sort of consumer goods as much anymore. And at Playground, we're focused on sort of larger future tech and investments that change sort of the paradigm of how we live as a human race. And here are some examples of products we've done in the past. Sorry to some people who visit Playground, and I've showed some of these slides before, but I think it's good to kind of show this again because there are people who haven't seen it. Here's a collection of ID stuff. some more ID stuff that we've done from recent to the past, and some very current stuff as well. And not, we don't just do industrial design, we also help companies build their brand, as well as sort of how they market themselves and talk about themselves. And it ranges, right? It's from business collaterals to video to marketing. We've done sort of a range of these things. And here's some more examples. So like the later stuff is like the essential devices, and sort of designing around how it's marketed and how it's positioned, and sort of how it's developed, and sort of the mentality around secondary device, etc. And just the bottom right here, what you see is I shrunk it so really you can't see exactly what it is, but we also spend a lot of time developing investment plans and decks for companies that we invest in. A huge part of design, I think, being at Playground, design is just a really small subset of things, what we've grown to realize. And there's a huger effort around raising funds and building sort of a marketing effort of a business to become very successful. It's not just like, hey, I made a very beautiful product and here we're going to succeed. Sometimes it's very disheartening to know that. One example is CastAR, right? We funded them 25 million, and in the end they still failed. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but we move with a little bit more caution there. So beyond sort of the example of work that we've done in the past, today we're at a place called Playground. It's essentially a venture capital fund, but it's unique in the Bay Area because our founders realized that there's a sort of a sweet space where there are companies that like Y Combinator. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the investment space, but there's companies like Y that invest, like $100,000 into like hundreds of companies a year. And the idea in investment, if there's an investment banker or anyone working in VC, I'm doing a high level overview, but like the interesting thing is, if you think about investment, it's generally you want to diversify, right? And if you invest in a lot, one company is going to have sort of return. And what's interesting for us is that we realize that Y is doing this thing where they're like, hey, we're going to invest $100,000 in hundreds of companies, and one return, let's say Uber, brings back exponential growth in billions of dollars. So our benefit of just spending $100,000 is nothing to that return. And that's sort of that idea that's been happening in the Bay. But what's interesting for us is that Y just gives you the money and says, go off and figure it out on your own. And so therefore people sometimes, founders especially, or entrepreneurs like any of you guys in here, would say, all right, I'm going to go out and now I have to find a designer, and then I have to find an engineer, and I have to find someone to help me biz dev. And if I don't have that money, I have to be scrappy and do it all on my own, and it becomes overwhelming. Playground came in and said, okay, we understand we have $900 million to invest, but we'll also build a team of experts to help you build your company. So, and it comes for free. It's a part of the deal. So An and I are a part of the deal. Essentially, we're slaves to the VC.
And I think a lot of times the guys who run startups and found companies, a lot of times they're scientists and engineers and people who've been in labs most of their life. So they don't really understand or know the value of design, or how we can help them, how we can push them further, and how we could get them the next round of funding. So here at Playground, it's applied for the package.
So so that's what makes Playground super unique, is we invest not only money, but we invest time, and time of the designers, and time of engineers, and time of operators, and time of founders who have developed things in the past with success. For example, one of our founders used to intern Elon Musk, and like for him to just like nonchalantly say that to us, we were thinking like, I would never have been able to experience or be sort of rubbing shoulders with someone who was in that caliber at a place like Astro, and not to say like Astro is not great or any smaller consultancy, but it was such a crazy insight to realize, hey, this is another level. Like these are people who invented Android, right? One of the founders invented Android, sold it to Google. So it's like insane to know that we're able to have those types of connections here.
There's there's a recent robotics company that came in that we invested in, and he's sitting right by us. And we found out that he created iRobot and the whole Roomba, the whole company. And we're like, look, he's right here, right next to us.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to be in this space. But for people who don't understand investment, this is sort of a quick high level. The anatomy of investing is, so in this world, you work in a couple different areas, right? If you're a startup and if you have a quick idea, you're in the seed round. Usually, seed round is sort of you're bootstrapping, you're starting off, you're a newbie, and then there's series A, B, C, D, E, and F. Those are like series when you become a little bit more established. You have a business plan, you've got a little bit of money, you're already growing, you're like 10 to 15 employees. Each stage, A, B, C, D, becomes a more mature phase of your company. So for example, Uber is probably in a series JYK, because they're so further ahead with a lot more money. And this is sort of the space we work in. The sweet spot for us is B and C, right? Usually it's late A, but B and C are where the type of maturity of companies are. And usually, if you could imagine, those companies have design and those companies have like sort of a business model, but they still need some development, and that's the sweet spot for us. A good way to think about this is like, if you're a seed round, your investors are usually like, think of it like your drug dealer friend, or your mom and dad, or your best friend, or yourself, or something. Like, it's very like kind of bootstrappy, kind of like, hey, I'm doing this by myself. And what's interesting is like, I wouldn't go into a meeting and say, hey, mister, I'm starting my business called SQ1, and I'm like, my drug dealer's like funding me. I would go into it and say, hey, I'm in seed round and I have an angel investor. It comes off very professional, right? It's very interesting if you rephrase it in that way. And if you go into Series A, a good example is now you're not dealing with a drug dealer anymore. You're doing work with the cartels, and you're doing grandparent money now. That's one good comparison to help you understand. And so today we spend a lot of time with evil geniuses and mad scientists and people who are really insanely smart. And so what's funny is that sometimes we're out of our depths, but it's interesting is that with design, if you build up enough experience and sort of a process and method to your madness and how we design, it's less about sort of knowing everything and being sort of good at asking the right questions. And so we want to talk about some of the examples of projects that we've gone through Playground in hopes that they'll sort of have like an understanding for how VC works.
Velo is one company that we worked on with maybe within the last year or two. And what they do is they do metal additive printing, so 3D printing titanium bits and pieces. You would see them in, I guess, like SpaceX parts, human body parts, prosthetics, kneecaps, hip joints, all these things. But what Velo came to us and they were saying that for the medical industry, they print kneecaps and hip joints and various things. And the process is super fast. So they could print, say, a kneecap, 500 of them in a day. And it would be really low cost. And what the normal route for that would be to engineer, design something, send it overseas, have it manufactured, and months for the parts to come back. What Velo does is cut all of that down. They created this machine that could be sold to hospitals. And when you need a knee or hip replacement, you could have it on the spot on that day. So for us, we collaborated with them. We did all the ID work, all the branding and messaging and pitching stuff. And
I think the interesting thing about this is, if I had to like put it short, is that it's a bunch of like really smart dudes that said, hey, we wanted to play in the 3D printing space, but do metal additive, and had an idea for a really insanely smart device, but didn't have a way to present themselves or grow, and just wanted to compete as a consumer electronic product. And for us, when we learned about them, we said, okay, let's rethink who you are, and let's not just make another consumer electronic product, and let's make something that could grow exponentially and become an enterprise type company. So how about you rethink who you are, and let's call yourself a metal manufacturer. And like we can manufacture ideas at the speed of, or like manufacture at the speed of ideas. So like traditionally, again, what On is saying is you got to go to China, you have to like engineer, you spend months of iteration, and then you send it out, and then they build a part and you send it back. Their clients are Johnson & Johnson, Kaiser's, hospitals, surgeons. These people want new bones, new like surgical collarbones, etc. right away. So the nice part about them is like by reshaping the way they think about their business, changes the way they want to market themselves, grows them into a larger company. And that's how we want to work as advisors, but also redesign how they want to form their business. To add to that, being at Playground, I love the name Playground because we encourage people to play well together. And oftentimes if you have IP that is interesting, intellectual property that's interesting, or like patents that are great, or engineers that are amazing at what they do, sometimes we encourage people to play together and share ideas. One idea is like, if we took the same design, if you see here on the top right, and you implement that into a big warehouse, add these big ass arms that could 3D print titanium in the size of rocket ships, can you make a product that will eventually build houses? Can you make a product that will like to challenge what is being built today in the rocket space, right? So with that, they created this company called Relativity, and then now it's they're able to build a rocket that's 1,000 pieces versus 100,000 pieces, which traditionally would take 2 years. They could do it in 2 months, and that's sort of like the type of growth and the influence that we try to have people bring in as founders at Playground. You want to talk a little bit about these guys?
Yeah, so FarmWise is, you see hints of it here. It's this orange device, but what it is it's a robotic weeding. I'm not sure if you could call it a tractor, but it pretty much roams the fields, thousands and thousands of acres, 24/7 weeding. So all it is a bunch of sensors within this device that rolls around 24/7, using sensors and cameras to spot all the weeds and picking out precisely. So we cut down 98-99% of the pesticides are being used, and it's highly accurate. We were following one of these machines, and it was just using physical clippers, just picking them up. And in a way, you could argue that it cuts down labor for a certain demographic, but at the same time, we're also cutting down pesticide use,
bad chemicals in there,
bad chemicals,
and it works 24/7. I have some ethical problems with this company. Not that I have a problem with innovation taking away jobs, but some days I feel that way with this company. But it's still pretty interesting when you get to see it. The one thing I really think it was like we missed with this company is when we got to design it, I was like, dude, let's just make it this big ass box that's like a mirror finish, like all sides are like a mirror, and all it does is reflect its environment. So it's not really like an eyesore in the environment, but they didn't want to do that. So we ended up with this orange.
And with
thing.
a lot of the companies, you'll see a range of design treatment. Like with this, we did not do any ID design aesthetic, but we would like to. It's just where do we put our efforts and what makes the most sense for the business to succeed.
Yeah. So that goes back to our conversation about like if it's a series A, B, C, or whatnot. So some companies will only need some branding work or marketing work or video work or press work, etc. One awesome company and a good story is Jason Maiden. I think some of you guys know him. If you don't, he was one of our earlier like mentors. Shout out to Jason. He put me on to industrial design, and I'm like forever grateful for him for that. But long story short, he left Nike because he wanted to start sort of this brand, but Nike didn't feel like it was a viable market, right? It was that traditionally they would just take adult shoes and shrink them down for kids, and he wanted to create something around creating true performance for developing kids who want to grow up to be sort of in this space. I really love their quote around building stronger children versus fixing broken adults, because if you follow him, a lot of his core work is around like bringing up kids in the inner city, brown, black kids who if otherwise would never have access to STEM and STEAM and sort of this space. And this was just a platform for him to do that. It was less about like, hey, I'm making shoes. It was more about, hey, I'm using shoes because that's all that I know. and build it into something where it's a facility to make these kids grow up to feel like they're superheroes, and all the while learn about STEAM and STEM and engineering and etc.
Yeah, and being a part of Playground, he was able to use us as a team and pull everyone together, and we did a bunch of crazy but fun explorations of how to inject tech into some of these things. And it sounds like it could be crazy, but if you think about things like he was really strong about bringing physical play back to kids, so they go outside and run more. And some of the early concepts were like, oh, if you go run, if you're wearing these shoes, you go out and you run for a little bit and you play enough, it'll unlock your PS4, or else you just can't get online or something.
Those are the type of brainstorm projects that I think all designers love to have when you're sitting in a project like this. What else is interesting? This is one of those projects where after I left like Astro and Matter, we started to, when we started at Playground, one of the earlier projects that we worked on was to do some freelance for him just quickly. And he turned this around really fast. I told some of you guys already, but he turned it around in like a couple weeks, maybe like under a month. And he showed it to us at Playground. And on our way out, we just introduced him to the investment team. And they're like, dude, I really love this idea. Because he was, I think, what is the quote? Like, luck is the intersection of preparation and opportunity. Is he was already prepared. Like, he met the VC team. He just said, like, look at all the shit I made. Like, here's my business model. And boom, they're like, months later, it was like a $7 million investment into his company. So, like,
this was a really interesting investment, though, because if you compare Superheroic to all the other things that Playground invest in, this is more of a, I would say, lifestyle fashion company, light tech. But this company, I think Playground invests heavily into the founder, because he was such a cool dude, on point, like did his stuff, did his homework, knew the space, and was super dedicated.
Yeah. Those are sort of some of the examples of work that we do at Playground, but there's a ton of other things that we are working on now. Things like quantum computing, like bioscience stuff, a lot of neural network stuff, a lot of software as a service type stuff as well. And I don't know if you guys follow us, but we share some robotic stuff, so agilities. Sometimes you see some Boston Dynamics stuff roaming around in our Playground stories. But those are sort of the range of stuff that we work on. So sometimes it sort of, for us, at the end of the day, we wonder, like, how is it that we help these people out if we're just like ignorant as fuck to this space, you know? And that becomes sort of the challenge, right? Is like, how, if any given day right now we have like, almost nearly 50 companies that we've invested in. So like, how do you handle all that? And so for us, we like to think of it as, okay, if we've designed at Playground for a while, this is sort of the way venture capital has taught us about managing design, is sort of some of the lessons that we have for that. With that said, the first lesson is easy. Just use really large typeface and then use a black highlight to overwhelm people. And that's not a joke. Actually, truly, the list is, does anyone know Sand Hill Road? No? Sand Hill Road is something that we've learned at Playground, which is sort of this exit right here. And it's not specifically there all in Sand Hill Road, but it's known, if you're in the VC areas, it's known for investment, and sort of all sorts of people come here to find people who are private investors or even big time investors to build out their company. And Sand Hill is one option, right? I think for us, the value is, I think a lot of people think of crowdsourcing as their first source, or just finding like a client or finding someone with a lot of money like a Samsung or Google to help them build their career. But there's also this option of like, hey, why can't you guys become entrepreneurs and build your own businesses? Sand Hill is the option, right? Because if you really think about it, Sand Hill has everything. It ranges from hardware. It ranges to, if you have an idea for a festival, it ranges from, if you have like an idea for, I don't know, a perfume, there's an investor for everything. It's just, you need to find that. And some of the stories that I know these are failing companies, but at some point they were like praised as one of the biggest companies or one of the hypest thing, right? So it's all in marketing. But at the end of the day, back to On Point is like, we believe in founders and not just the business practice. Is like, we go through a rigorous process of looking into founders and saying like, hey, what is your track record? What have you done? And are you successful in it? Versus just saying, hey, I showed up, like Hector showing up and saying, I have this idea for Lens, and having no track record. I would never believe him. Fuck you, Hector. I'm just kidding. But there's a space for everyone. And what we've learned through our design career is, if you have an idea, sometimes you should go out and fund it yourself. And happy to answer those questions for how you could build those types of decks and find those types of people and find those types of connections. I was just talking to Anna, who owns Lioness, and she was saying like, there's a small market of people who invest in women's health, like sexual health. There's like those people who will invest if you have the right connections and if you are ready. But Sand Hill Road is one lesson that we've learned, and it's one path. Two is, it's very important, back to the comment about us saying like, hey dude, we're in series A, B, and C, which is a very mature companies. It still doesn't matter, because stories that aren't told right are always heard wrong for us. And you only have one chance to make the first impression, we feel like. So oftentimes it's better to do it right. And this is the value for all you designers, is that if you can't persuade your client, or, in your work, if you can't hit it right the first time, I wouldn't even try it again. Like, why are you being lazy on the first execution? But for us, it's the value is around sort of investments and designing for investments, as well as a lot of times people are either frugal or like bootstrappy, or like trying to be like, have high velocity and move farther and longer. And it's just like, you're missing the point. And the shitty point is another bullet point for us that will come. But like, we believe that it's like, really, this is a very important part.
I think at the end of the day, we all know, we all as designers know that we are storytellers. We're here to help all these scientists and engineers to tell their story. And really, it's a lot on their shoulder to try to wear so many hats, as to be CEOs and be the business guy, to sell your thing, to build your pitch deck, to manage the websites, to manage all these various stories. So that's an opportunity for us as creative storytellers to step in and help them tell their story. Early on, maybe like a few years ago, we were working with we made an investment in this company. Let's just call company A the brothers, and company 2 Hector, or whatever. And we developed this. We invested in this company, and they ended up getting around 50 mil total of investment. This company specifically, our company had the equipment, machines, the science, everything nailed down and ready to be developed and shipped. We only made 50 mil, whereas this company, other company B, company Hector, came in and they received over 200 and something mil without products. Their website is just fully rendered, animations, all that stuff, all smoke and mirrors. But they ended up winning, getting the larger bid and making more money, only because they're better represented and telling their story better.
Yeah, and so therefore, like, telling the right story immediately, even without sort of physical prototypes or tangible products, sometimes is value. So not that we're saying fake it till you make it, but there's this sense of like, the perception is important.
Yeah, and a lot of these companies, when we talk about Series A, B, C, D, and E, a lot of these companies out here, a lot of these startups live from series to series. If they don't make A, they can't go to B. If they can't go to B, they won't make it to C. And if you don't sell it right, you're not going to see the end of that next series. So it's kind of our job to just help them get there.
Yeah. One important thing is, I think, whether you're in a consultancy or in-house, that we've sort of shifted our perspective being in a VC, is that because we invest in you, we have skin in the game. But like, I've thought about my past and sort of thought about how I design, and sometimes you become, and I know this because my last job, I was like scoping out projects, and I was like writing project plans, and I was trying to scope it to sort of based on time and budget and like efficiency and the number of team members, and it kind of ruins sort of that. Maybe that's on the next bullet but that kind of ruins the process, is that you feel as if you're not you want to have this mentality of being a founder as well. And I think what we're seeing as a trend in the Bay Area is, like, you see, right, Yves Pahar, he partially owns what Jawbone, partially owns that Juicero company, partially owns a couple companies. And like I've seen at Astro Ammunition as well, as there are people starting to not take payment upfront and start to take equity and a stake into companies. And I think that is an interesting trend for, I don't know, freelancers or any of you guys out there building a business, is like, learn about this stuff and see if you could take a stake in the company, because one, you also build, you feel a little bit more dedicated to the project as well. And I think that's one interesting insight.
Yeah, I think a few things on this is, in the venture world, design budget, I think it's minuscule to what people get funded. Say a company comes through, they get 50 to 100 mil. What is 50,000 worth of design? What is 100,000 worth of design? But design, the return of investment is massive. There's so much value, but I think too often it is an afterthought, maybe. Or most of these guys don't understand the value of design, and they don't understand that they need it.
Which leads us to the other point is, you probably feel this in your job too, is a lot of times, or even with clients who come to you, or even freelance work, is like, hey, I only have $5. Can you do this for me? And it's usually they already figured out their business plan or whatnot. I think to be really talented and good designer, I think you want to go through the whole process of helping someone formalize and clarify who they are as a brand. And sometimes we shouldn't be treated as an afterthought. And it's still the same at every level of this business, is that even when we're working with a company who's out of seed round in a more like a sophisticated phase, which is Series A, Series B, Series C, we still see a bunch of holes in their company that needs work, that needs branding, that needs design work. And it's never, ever let a client tell you, hey, we don't need this, or hey, this design is not important. It's always important. There's always work to be redone. Example is Velo, right? Velo came to us and was like, hey, we're just these like geeks that made this titanium thing. What we're titanium added a 3D printer. What should we do with it? Should we like formalize a new plan for them? So there's always work to be done there.
Yeah, I think a lot of the technology that come to us to deliver to consumers is not really digestible, and we kind of help them filter through that.
Yeah. So it goes back to me talking about when we were scoping out work, right? It's like sometimes people are like, my budget is only like 20,000, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000, whatever it is. But it's like, dude, I've seen that you've made this type of investment. People are making millions of dollars of funding to you. Like, why are you treating like design as a small piece of it? The last one is not the last one. This one is kind of controversial. And I think there's reason for that is some designers are like, do deep research, really understand the topic and really learn about it. But sometimes you just are incapable. And in our circumstances, like, dude, there's like 50 companies that we're handling, and it's like all of them are really deep in their space, where it's like, dude, if we're working with a quantum physics computer company, like, I can't ever do enough research to really understand who they are, and I will never fake that. And when we're dealing with bioscience, the same way, like, I could bring up chemistry and biology that I've learned in college or high school, but I will never be able to talk about like proteins and atoms and in the space that they will be able to. So I think it's totally okay to not do deep research, but ask the right questions. And the right questions sometimes could be like, hey, I don't fucking know what you're doing. Just tell me exactly what it is in a simpler way of how we could communicate this on a human-centered level. Like, how can the same way as making sort of, right, Velo be a little bit easier to be perceived, right? Like, let's not talk about the deep technical aspects of like how you created the laser sintering that like burnt the titanium powder that then like fuse this additive material into 3D printing. I don't care. Like, how do we simplify that for your true customer base to really understand? And a simpler story is worth more. Um, and then after that, I feel like you still fail, and I think it's okay. And I think there's design, especially or in our spaces, there it goes through these phases. Like we were just talking, like On worked on the Nike Fuel Band, and that was really big, and it was like a huge thing that like sort of created this new space of like wearable technology. But that's died, and no one knows about it. And at some point, your products will fail, and it's okay that those things happen. But the lesson there is it's probably better for you to build a rigidity and like a way to navigate with different methods of design. And the last point is I think it's okay to be a shitty designer because COVID will lay all of us off anyways. That's not an important point, but that's sort of what we have. There's a lot more sort of deep information that we can get into as far as like talking about the VC space, but we kind of want to give you guys a high level of that and sort of the high level of what we've learned, how do you adapt, and sort of just perspective of like working at these three tiers, right? Like the in-house, the consultancy, and then now at sort of this investment space, and how do you sort of navigate that, but how do you relate it back to our design career in general? And hoping some of these insights will help you in the way you want to freelance or the way you want to build your career path and sort of other paths for you guys as you grow in your career. That's it. Any questions? I think we just hit that.
Can you guys describe your transition from industrial designer to where you guys are now?
We're still doing industrial design. I think we spend less time staying. We specialize in industrial design because only the nature of Playground is that a lot of our investments need sort of everything, and we've recommended companies, like we've recommended work to companies like Level, to like companies like all the design firms when we feel overwhelmed. But sometimes in-house, a lot, and you guys know this, like when it rains it pours, and like sometimes you just have to do the work. And it's usually the night before some press release where someone's like, holy fuck, I need like 4 renderings or whatever. But the transition was, I think On and I wanted to start Creative Session, and we were about to leave. I was about to leave Matter, and On was about to leave Astra, and we were going to just start Creative Session. I don't think we were going to start Creative Session. We were just going to start our own design studio. It would be called something brand new, and it would just be like a studio. And when we were doing that, one of the directors at Playground at the time, it was a small company, probably like 10 people at the time. They like reach out and they're like, yo, emailed us a couple times. On was busy. Some of you may have heard the story already. On and I were both busy because we're leading projects at our prospective consultancies. And they're like, hey, we're Playground, want to talk to you, please respond. And we want to tell you a little bit about us. And so again, back to our conversation about you only get one chance to tell the right story. Their website was a video of clouds, and then it says like,
enter your email.
Yeah, enter your email and come play or something. So I looked at it, I was like, who the fuck is this? Like, I don't care. So I ignored it
for like 8 months.
Yeah, I ignored it for a long time because I just wasn't interested, didn't know anything about them. And then one day at a design week in San Francisco, one of the directors, Playground, came and just like cornered me and was like, hey dude, like 5 minutes, let me just talk to you 5 minutes. And he's like, dude, been trying to talk to you, but you guys haven't been responding. I'm going to send you an email tonight. Please read it. And then so he sends me an email, and it's this article like the founder of Android leaves Google, starts a studio with $300 million in investment to both design and develop. And I was just like,
the fuck, this is serious.
I just felt so little. I was like, holy shit. Like, I've been sitting here just worried about like these consultancy projects that I've been doing for Google that doesn't go anywhere. And all of a sudden this guy's telling me like, the guy that used to intern Elon Musk and the guy that like built Android for Google wants to hire my brother and I to like start their design, like help them run the design arm. I was like, dude, we're fucking dicks.
Yeah.
So we just started that process of like interviewing and kind of talking about our philosophy. And they're through the interview, they're just like, do whatever you're gonna do for Creative Session with us.
Yeah,
And that's basically.
Yeah, I think to answer your question was they're like, oh, whatever you were doing with Creative Session, just take that and apply it here. And what we were doing with Creative Session was everything: branding, graphics, products, whatever we liked. And the good thing is it gave us a platform to kind of experiment on a larger scale, you know, like try things with large companies, with real companies that are getting funded. And I don't know, yeah, kind of, that was the transition, I guess. But we still do ID. We do everything pretty much.
Yeah.
Not good at all, but
We're probably not great at it anymore, but.
Hi.
Good question. Thank you.
What's up, you sexy beasts?
Thanks, guys.
whoa!
Whoa!
I got a question for you. I'm going to ask in a very roundabout way, but I think it's something I've experienced in my career. What role does morality, ethics, core values play in your design process, and how do you manage, conflicts, whether it's who you work for, or especially today? I feel like this is something that a lot of people are sensitive to.
Yeah.
Whether it's just controversial things, it might be projects, it might be people, whatever. How do you navigate that space, being kind of at being in this like venture space where you might encounter projects you might not want to work with, or people, or you find out after the fact that some shit went down? What's your take on all that? So I just wanted to ask you that very difficult question in a very roundabout way.
Go ahead.
Have
a good PR agent. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, have a really.
If you can't say it, that's totally fine. I just want to hear what you guys think and how you navigate that.
I mean, have a good PR agent is one good answer, right? But I still like. Some days I still struggle with the fact that like the saying is like if you don't own your own business, like you never will have control of anything, you know. And it's just like if I'm always gonna work for someone, and no matter what, it's the couple things. One thing right now, right, is that a lot of people are worried about waste and global warming and over trashing the world, right? But why are we printing so many plastic things for masks? Like, what is the ethic there? Like, it's hard to balance those things, right? There's the catch-22 there, and so like, there's limits to it. I feel like it's like, how am I gonna eat? You know what I mean? It's like I have to do this because I also have to eat, or I just have to leave. So there's like, it's something we should have on DUI, Spencer, when you come on and we'll chat about it.
All right, yeah, we can talk. I mean, it's
like
something for me. I've encountered a few times in my career where I'm like, I don't know if I should be working on this, or man, I don't know.
I think at our levels, it's easier for us to say no to certain projects, right? It's easier for us, but for like, say someone who's starting out, it's like, yeah, man, like it's up to you, right? It's like if you're, I don't know, if the butterfly effect of it is like you're ruining a whole country, then, you know, do you do it?
Yeah.
Of course I wouldn't. Like, of course the answer for that is no. Like, I would never take on that project. So there are people, there are projects, there are companies that like violate things that I ethically or morally don't believe in. But some days it's challenging, man.
Yeah. I feel like not every project, or not every project that lands on your plate you completely 100% love. You just got to make sure you're with and surrounded by people who will pick mostly the good ones, and maybe every now and then there's gonna be some bad ones.
Yeah, where I've kind of settled is design is amoral, but not necessarily unethical. So there's or unempathetic. And what does that mean in the end? But yeah, we'll talk about it when I fly out.
we were I was talking to Anna about this, and she was just like, there's a story about a girl, I don't know the exact details, so don't quote me on this, is she's walking along the beach, and after a storm, there's all these starfish washed onto the shore, and she just comes down and picks every couple ones and throws it back. And then some guy's like, why are you doing this? There's no value here. She's like, but I could affect change in at least one starfish's life. And I think for us as designers is like, if you could train yourself to have a good moral compass and a good, like sort of effectively a good ethical code, then I think there's ways for you to influence companies in small ways, in ways of like, if I would have never worked on Lioness, I would have never understand women in sort of the sexual health space. And it's the same way as being able to educate others to be open, you know? So there's for small ways that we could influence people, not 100%, but there's some.
Are you saying you're a sexual wizard? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Just
hit DMs, dude.
I'm gonna shut up till we do our episode. We'll keep it professional.
Sorry, Hector.
Thank you.
One quick question. Moving forward with design, do you think industrial design students will need to know UX and UI kind of skills to work at like a startup or a startup incubator like you guys are? Because it seems like a lot of your work has been a blend of both, right? Being able to kind of create those like slide decks and such and kind of create the visuals and product experience, but also like the physical product. So do you think that's like a valuable skill to have moving forward?
There's this weird thing that happened in the industry that I don't understand why. Is like a couple years ago, all of a sudden someone separated UI and UX and ID, and I don't think they were ever mutually exclusive. There's this, it's odd to say, hey, I'm going to design this device without knowing sort of how a human has to experience it. You know, it's very bizarre for me, but I get it. It's probably a little bit more sophisticated. Someone needs to understand both like how software is developed and how software is developed in ways that a button could be pressed, that a camera could activate and actuate a lens or something. So like to be able to understand everything, going back to our sort of talk, is like being able to understand and comprehend everything without needing to be experts in it is great, right? Because it only puts you in a position to feel as if you're in a director level and just not just, you know, one piece of the puzzle. I would recommend it, but I don't know. There are other people who, you know, like are totally happy and fine with specializing.
Yeah, I think it doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
It goes kind of hand in hand with everything we do. We create human experiences and all that stuff. So
the goal is we hope that these insights will give you an idea of like potentially where one of you guys could fall in sort of the design atmosphere at some point in your career, and less about like, this is where you need to be. So don't take it as this is how the industry has to be, because there's a ton of people doing just fine specializing. There's a ton of people just wanting to focus on one thing or another.
Awesome. Thank you guys.
Yeah.
I got a question.
Oh, go ahead.
So how do you guys go about pitching to a company that like makes a product or works in the space that you know nothing about?
How do we go? Good question. Let me see if I got it right. How do we pitch design to a company that we don't know anything about? Is that?
No, that they make a product or they work in a space that you know nothing about.
Oh, like I said, I feel like it's good to just be humble and admit that you don't really understand it. Yeah, do a little bit of research, read up on what that space is. But for example, I was just in Boston, near the MIT area, which is a lot of medical stuff and sort of like life science stuff. And honestly, I don't remember any of my like biology or chemistry study, and it was fucking difficult for me to understand anything they were talking about. But the challenge is we sat through an investment meeting maybe last week, and it's the same, right? Our founders, people in the executive suite levels and people who are dealing with the millions of dollars to invest, they're like, yo, bro. And this is exactly the same as design. Sometimes we as designers become sort of, we spit too much design jargon that people get confused, right? You put them in the spin where you're like, this is so esoteric, where it's like, what did you say? I don't understand what aesthetics and mood board mean. You know what I mean? And sometimes we're sitting in this life science meeting and they're like, we're dealing with medical DNA and like this strand is called mRNA and these are the proteins that we have to charge and they're injected in this space and it's all this technical term. And literally one of the founders was like, dude, what are you saying? I don't understand what you're saying.
This is
like
for a genome sequencing company. Give you good context. And if you think about it, he's developing a pitch deck to pitch to normal humans who have the capital that will invest in you or not. So if I don't get it, they won't get it and you won't get the money. So it's our job as people who are ignorant to
say we're ignorant.
Yeah, ignorant to the space to try to help them formulate and understand that and tell that story in a way for a normal human to understand and know. But majority of the projects we work on, every project is a new category and a new space. So we feel dumb all the time, I think.
And I think it's okay. But another thing to add to that is what was interesting is and this is someone who has been in the industry for a long time, right? The founder to say like, hey, can you simplify this because I don't understand it? Because the really at a pitch level is you just want to have a second meeting. And the second meeting is fine. We'll find a scientist and we'll find these people with deep technical expertise to talk to you about what you're nerding out about. But the core of design is like, let's tell the story succinctly, clearly, cleanly, and easy to comprehend. And what is it? It's like, hey, you're trying to cure cancer by what we came up with was like, hey, you're literally just trying to cure cancer by software engineering, like how software engineer code, but recode DNA. That's all. That's all I wanted to hear and I understand it. But he spent like 40 pages to explain that. And we were like, that's one solution, right? It's like, hey, how do you simplify the job for us sometimes is by allowing ourselves to feel little. It allows other people to feel as if they don't need to spew all these smartness for us to collaborate and work together. Is that helpful?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know. We work with a lot of experts, and it's like let the experts be the experts and just soak it in because they're cutting through all the notes for you and they're giving you all the things you should know. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's good to like we're not emphasizing. We're in no way we're teaching people to do not do any research, do not like understand the subject. Of course, understand the subject, but like sometimes, and I feel like it's most of the time with probably 11, 12 years of the game now, is like sometimes it's so much easier to just have someone give you the spark notes and say like, all right, let's just collaborate now. And I'll come with my sort of toolbox and artillery of design and I'll facilitate this.
Yeah. And in a way, I think that is to like kind of support everybody and let you guys know that it's okay not to know, you know, like sometimes we feel dumb. Sometimes we feel like we're not qualified for a certain job. Dude, most of these jobs we aren't qualified for, but we just have to reach into the design toolbox that we built through our career and use what we do know to formulate an opinion and develop things for I don't know, these foreign subjects.
Yeah. It's okay to have imposter syndrome. It's not okay to have the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is like, you know very little about anything and you act as you're an expert. That just comes off bad in the end. Don't fucking do it.
Language, just kidding. So quick question just hit me. Hector and I are kind of in the
other people's questions.
We're kind of in education space, but I'm curious from your perspective with your experience, everything you've been through and the breadth and depth of experience, what do you feel is missing from design education today? And you guys went to a pretty kick-ass school, so I'm wondering, what do you think's missing, or what would you add to what's typically offered?
I keep thinking of like the saying, like design, think locally and what is it? Work locally, but think globally. I always think of that saying for some reason is like, even I admit like I had this problem is like when I was in school, I always compared myself to like my yardstick to the person next to me and the person next to me. And like, we're in such a global space that it's like, sometimes in university, you get so lost, tracked in this competitive space of people next to you that you don't think globally. And sometimes I see people's portfolio that share it to me, and I'm like, dude, you're trying to compete with someone who's like going to a community college that like barely has any experience around this expertise, and you think you're better than them, but you're not better than the F level designer who went to a design school. Not to say that you need to go to a design school, but like compare yourself globally, because it's a global market now. It's just for as far as education, it's hard because I don't know
It's
what's
so
going on in
disconnected.
Hector's class, so I can't really critique him, or I don't know what's going on today in design education in general. But I know that like sort of social media and just the internet has been such a great tool to learn that I'm like, I almost feel like, is the traditional class even interesting or relevant?
We'll let the experts do the expert work. That's you guys. So.
Because you with your online like YouTube channel, like why are you fucking up? Like, why are you eating Hector's lunch? You know what I mean? It's like you're fucking up his lunch.
No, I'm on a different flow. He's on a different flow. It's all good.
Don't lie to me. We know it. Let me simplify this. You're taking a piece of his pie. No, I'm kidding. That's a good question. I've been thinking about that deeply. I want to go back to education, and we've been asked to go back to CCA, but I haven't figured out like exactly what that is. And sometimes it's frustrating because there's people who are like super passionate about it, and there are people who are fucking lazy. And it's like, you're clearly not doing any work. You're not showing any effort. And it's just like, I think that's what I'm afraid of. Anyway, good question. Thank you.
So
There
I
any
had a question for
all
you.
designers in here? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, so back to the kind of the subject of like specialization versus generalization.
Yeah.
Are there any like creative disciplines or like tasks that you generally do outsource?
That we outsource now, or?
So like, for example, like I don't know anything about like shooting, producing video. So like if I had to, if I had a client that like wanted to do that, I would definitely think about outsourcing, right?
Yeah. We would do things like that if we're overwhelmed with it. But traditionally, I think we like to try things.
What has also really worked for us too is you teach us something, we're going to learn and use it. So in the beginning, we outsourced a lot of branding stuff, a lot of professional high level branding stuff. And as creators, as curious people, we've gotten it, digested it, and have seen that we're capable of doing this too. So
Totally.
hired out, we've picked it up, we've learned, and now we want to kind of mess with it. But at the same time, we've gotten to points where it's just too much work and we need to outsource it. So we do outsource it.
Yeah, rely on the experts to do the work, but it's good. I think more so today, I would outsource the work, right? It's you do it, you understand it. So therefore I could say like, hey, I hired Spencer to do the photography work for me and he's bullshitting. It takes me like 5 minutes to do this. This guy's trying to quote me for 24 hours. Of course, I'm going to be a director level and be like, dude, you're fucking around, dude. No, I'll pay you this much for 5 minutes. You know what I mean? It's more for the experience and being able to, I think all of it is essentially in the end is to be able to help navigate and direct pieces to build a bigger picture.
Yeah, I think the generalization versus specialization thing too, if you have, once you go through the process, like even general knowledge of it, going through it slightly, you start to understand how to critique things and how to break things down. Does it cost right or does it not cost right?
And it works in the nature of where we're at because we spend a lot of time advising too. And sometimes it's like, hey, I recommend using this designer because this is exactly what you need and this is the scope of work you need. So it's good to know that. Thank you. That's a good question.
Thank you for your honest answer.
Yeah, for sure.
I have a question. So
you're still awake.
yeah, I'm still awake. So the thing is, like, I'm in Turkey, right? And I see that in this part of the world, like, design in general isn't appreciated a lot by the companies, especially like industrial design. So how do you like pitch that? Like, how do you pitch the valuability of the design to the companies or to the clients? like the value of design itself?
That's a good question. It's almost challenging because we're in such a space that people appreciate it, you know, like thank you to Apple and all these companies that make the product great.
But they still don't appreciate it, you know.
Yeah.
It's like we're surrounded by examples, but design is still not.
I think it may seem as if people appreciate it and value it. Honestly, at the end of the day, a lot of times it's like it's still an afterthought for us.
Yeah.
And what helps me a lot is like creating, whether it's a portfolio or creating sort of a process that really explains explicitly how you will perform your work, really helps qualify how much you want to charge and qualify how you will execute the project, right? Like if someone came to me and said, hey, can you design a logo for me? And I was like, hey, I want $100,000 with nothing, you know, of course they're gonna be like, what, why? But if I said, I want to, like, it's $100,000 because I'm going to spend, you know, 2 months doing some deep research about your product. And then I'm also going to do, you know, like 50 different steps of why these pieces matter for me to that has to be executed for me to clearly and precisely design one logo mark that's amazing for you. Therefore, then it's verifying why it's okay. And I think if you integrate that into your process, it'll really be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think Steve Jobs said once that the consumers don't know what they want until you put it in front of them. The same thing with startups, the same thing with technologists, the same thing with all these companies is they don't know what design is. They don't know what the capabilities are. Even the most tech savvy people, they come to us thinking they don't need design when obviously they do. And I mean, an insight from Playground, I think in the early days when we make a capital investment, one of the options was to buy design with some of that capital, to hire the team and have us help build your company design wise and engineering wise and all those things. And most of the time we realized that most of these startups said no to design help and said no to engineering, or they would have their own engineer, whatever. That stuff aside, most of the time they said no to design because they didn't realize the value of design. After a while, we started doing exercises of applying design without their consent. So we would say, Velo really started out with, they came, they got capital. They were like, oh, we're all good, whatever. We were like, no, you guys aren't good. So we took their branding, redid the whole thing, redid the whole 3D titanium printer machine on our own efforts, everything, whole website, all that stuff. And then we pitched it back to them and they went nuts. They were like, holy shit, this is what design can do for us. And then we began doing that for many more startups within Playground, and some of the founders and the partners started to see how effective that was, because most companies are like, oh, fuck that, we don't need design, we're not going to take that up. But it turned out the return of investment is very high. So it's kind of a weird approach. When you ask anyone, they won't see the value of design and they won't care for it. But when you do that free work and you toss it out there, then they see it.
Yeah,
Almost.
I think it's interesting because it's really about educating, right? Like you think about people don't know what design is. It's like the thought is, oh, what are you gonna do? You're gonna like draw something for me?
You're gonna color
And
this?
I think the idea is like you're missing the whole design thinking, the processes that go behind it, and sort of the expertise of how to develop from an idea from sort of its infancy, where it's like it's sort of young and naive, to like really refining into something that's sophisticated. And On brings up a good point, is that sometimes we've done projects where, you know, 1 + 1 is 3, right? Is like we do what's asked, and then we'll do like 2 or 3 more that's like beyond the scope of work, only to say like, yo, like, I know this is what you asked, but here's something that we think would be more viable for your brand. And it sucks because you're putting in more hours, but then you're also leaving a great feeling. You know, it's like the way you make people feel is more important than that. It's like, holy fuck, they just like spent another week cranking on like 2 more concepts that wasn't even asked. But I think that's the nature of our business, is sometimes we just let ourselves out, and that's okay.
Yeah. And it comes back to what we said earlier is their success is our success. So really it's like, we're going to go out, put in the extra effort to make sure they get somewhere, because they fail, we fail.
Yeah. I know it's tough because if you're a student or you're starting out or you have like limited time and it's like a short project or something, like it's hard to dedicate those hours. I know what it means, but like try it. Like just add just a couple more hours into your day. Try to like, you know, polish it a little bit more or add a couple more concepts. And I think it always will benefit you than not.
Yeah.
I would
Chance
say.
to learn new tools, chance to try things.
Good question.
Thank you.
Get some sleep.
Earlier, you guys mentioned how taking equity is a possible route versus taking payment upfront. What might that look like for designers just getting started in the field?
I mean, you could do like a simple research. I think like CEOs and founders are like the way the percentage they take stake in companies are like 1-something%. So it's not like very big, right? So like obviously the way you take equity is somewhere in the point something 0.15 or 0.025% of a company, because it has to be something very minuscule. A lot of times the in your project proposal or the way you pitch is like, hey, like this is maybe $50,000, let's just say, or this is $100 project. But maybe if you can't, like, if this seems sort of beyond sort of a budget that you don't have now, maybe we could talk about some equity or some royalty or some sort of payment plan that we could say, well, if you're raising money in the future, let's trade this work for a percentage of what you raised. So it's like, all right, here's the promise. It's a bet though. These are bets. So at some point you're gonna be like, I'm gonna take a 0.015% of stake in your company, but I'm hoping that you will succeed. And if you succeed, I succeed, going back to the sort of the success story that we were talking about. And it's therefore now you got to put up some filters. One, you got to learn about the CEO. Two, you need to like really believe in what they're doing. One good example right now is like everyone's making masks, right? There are people emailing us about like, hey, how do we develop a silicone type mask right now? Or let's design mask. And it's like, one, this founder is looking for an opportunity to capitalize on this pandemic situation. There's a bunch of companies out there already building these things and they're giving it out for free. So like if you scope that work now, right, you could say like, this guy is clearly just motivated by capital and money. Is that sort of a value I align myself to? Or maybe it's like some guy came to you, for example, and said, hey, I own a like aquarium, like I make aquarium products and I'm using fish filters as a way to, I don't know, filter out disease right now. And I'm translating my manufacturer that makes filters into, I don't know, a company that will pump out masks. And I think the growth there could be really interesting. Would you want to like help us grow that? Like that seems like maybe an interesting product for you, then say yes. But it's an agreement that you would come up with the founders and whoever's developed that business on their own. And it's, I don't know, there are the challenge for us today is I think there was one company called maybe Whitespace. I'll do the research. It might be Whitespace, but it's like a design founded venture capital where it's like design funds design. And there's not a lot of that happening right now. And there's those people that you could look into, but there's not very many design founded companies. So it's a little bit challenging because again, back to like, people don't think design is very important.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen some examples of that through like Fuse Project and Ammunition.
Yeah.
Random companies getting some type of equity for design work.
Yeah. And yeah, Fuse is a good example of that.
Yeah, it sounds like you just have to do the research and like really get to know the company. But yeah, thanks a lot, especially for the examples.
Yeah, understand the company and then figure out how much you think you value yourself.
Yeah.
And how much you value your time, and know that it's not going to be like a 2-month thing, right? It's like a long-term investment, because the truth of the matter at Playground is like returns are like a 10-year thing. Like it takes 10 years for us to see sort of fruition. Not to say that that's the truth today. Like there's a couple companies that we have that sold to Amazon and sold to Apple recently, and those are like exponential growth. But I think that's something around the like Moore's law of like technology growing exponentially every 2 years, and it's got to this point where it's like just exploding. But like again, it's how much is your time worth, and do you want to spend that time on it? And how much do you believe in the founder? And how much money you want to make?
Got it. Thanks.
Let's take one more question.
I had a question. You talked about Sand Hill Road and like seeking out investors yourself if you think you have an idea. Like for someone who's starting out, like how would you start that process? You drive up to Sand Hill Road and see where you can go. Like how would you start?
Yes. So a really cool story we put up onto, I think there's like a podcast on Playground's website, is we recently were talking to the founders of Relativity, those guys who are 3D printing titanium rockets. And they wanted to start a business around that, right? Is like additive titanium printing, and like what model can they form? And the idea was they're both engineers geeking out on sort of the return of this, right? It's like, hey, if I build this product and I built rockets, what is the return and what's the growth? And they created this business model. Long story short, they created a sort of deck that was capable of pitching to receive funding, but they had nowhere to go. And yes, you can't just drive to Sand Hill because you just can't like shop stores. You can't just be like, hey, obviously you have to set up meetings and find a way, like build a connection in that space. And so therefore, even though we gave you that insight, there's no way you guys could, not to say it's unachievable, but what they did was really impressive to us. Is they built this deck, and I kid you not, he was like, 2 routes. I could go crowdsource, I could go Kickstarter, or I could just fund it myself. And obviously they can't fund it because it's millions of dollars to build robotic arms. So they're like, let's try to reach out to Mark Cuban. And so they went on their email and just typed mark.cuban @Mark Cuban, like just every single Mark Cuban email they could think of, and sent it out. And one day Mark Cuban emailed them back, was like, dude, this pitch deck, good, I'm investing. So it's like, dude, if you want to talk to Johnny Ives, try johnny.ives. whatever, Apple, johnny.ives@apple.com, send it out. Someone's going to respond. And like, that was the biggest lesson I learned from them, is like, you always are at a no, and someone's going to have to hand you that yes. So you are limiting yourself.
Yeah.
So create something and say, I have a great idea. Here's one thing. After our last meeting at Playground, we had a guy come in and was like, dude, I have a business idea and I want to pitch it to you guys. And he showed us a pitch deck, and I was like, this is totally wrong. Because designers are like, I have this great idea, let me render it out and let me just put it into a cool rendering and people will imagine the potential and exponential growth of it. No, pitch decks aren't like that. It's like hundreds of pages, and then some pages are in appendix that verify like, what is the market value, what is the return, what is the investment number, what is the team, who's on my team. Is it, if I'm making a basketball product and it's like a bunch of hockey players on my CEO suite, of course I'm not going to invest in your whole team or hockey players. I don't believe you guys could build basketball equipment. So it's like the list goes on. So don't build pitch decks and just think it's a rendering and it's like a small business model. It's really in depth. So like, do some research on that. But that story really inspired me, because I was like, dude, I honestly could just cold call or go on LinkedIn and find someone and send them a pitch deck. I've had people do that for us. And I knew it too. I was just like, this is a fucking scheme, dude. You're emailing a design director from Playground. You send me a pitch deck and you're like, hey, are you free to freelance on pitch deck building? And I was like, come on, dude. Bye. I'm getting out of here. You're going to try to get me to redesign your pitch deck. It's totally obvious that you're trying to get me to read it and pass it on. But I think if you have a viable and good product, it should be easy. There are those resources out there for us designers that we don't see and know about. Good question.
Thank you.
Hope everyone learned something. Email johnny.ives @ I don't know, what's his new office? Love something?
Love from.
Let's all send Johnny at love.
I actually did that the other day, but thank you so much for being our guest on Lens. And thank you everyone for being a part of this experience. Really appreciate your time and your insights in this space. We're going to be announcing our next Lens session on this coming Tuesday, so please be prepared for it. Yes, I'm sorry that I'm sure everyone here has additional questions, but we do have to be cognizant of everyone's time, and so I do apologize for that. But tune in for our next Lens. Thank you so much, everyone, and take care.
See you guys. Thanks.
Nice to meet everyone.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Peace.
Thank you.